Welcome back, guys. This is Jaz Munch here, doing another guide video on Beyond All Reason. Today we're going to be looking at the pawn and also the counterpart to it, which would be the Cortex Grunt. Okay, these guys are very good early game choices, especially if you want to try to do an attack on the enemy back line or their resource production early on, then I definitely would recommend these guys. Today we're just going to be first going over the stats of a pawn, just one individual guy here. You can see that down here in the corner, the cost of them, it has cost of 48 metal, basically 50, and then almost 1,000 energy. So very, very cheap as far as metal is concerned. And you'll see that can be very, very helpful because that means you can build a massive army of them and not even really dent your metal output, really. So just keep that in mind. These guys are very good metal cost for how much damage they can do early game. We're also going to be looking at their health. Here at the bottom you can see they have 335 damage, one of the weaker units of the game, definitely not a tanky type of unit. And then they also have a DPS of 600 or 990, a DPS of 900. Or I said it again, of 90, a DPS damage per second of 90, which is decent for the metal that it costs to make them. Definitely a weaker amount of damage, but when used correctly, you can actually compound that to make it definitely a little bit more. You can actually double it if used properly, the way pawns are intended. The range of the unit, that's talking about the attack range here, the red circle, it is 180, so it's a pretty small radius. I think the only thing that is smaller than that would be a tick or a rover. Those are a bit smaller range. Reload speed is 0.3, which just means how fast it shoots, which these guys shoot very, very fast. 0.3 is a very rapid reload speed. And then speed is talking about movement speed, and they are 84 in movement speed. So one important note is that pawns have the exact same movement speed of a grunt, which would be the Cortex version. This is the Armada version of the fast infantry bot. The Cortex version would be the grunt. Now, one difference between the pawn and grunt is that the grunt has a slightly increased range. So a grunt can probably shoot out about this far. Now, the fact that they move the exact same speed and the grunt has a longer radius of fire means that the grunt is actually better if microed appropriately than the pawn is, because a pawn could be chasing a grunt, but the grunt would be able to hit him while the pawn could not shoot at all. So that's something to be very mindful of if you are using these versus a grunt, is you could get out microed and just totally decimate your unit and get no value out of it at all. Now the loss is the LOS is the total distance of vision it has, which you can see this white circle. I'll get over here. The white circle that surrounds the unit is its vision, its line of sight. So pawns have a very good line of sight compared to most other units in the game. Especially even stronger units like tanks and the artillery or rocket bots, things of that nature. Pawns have a much better range of vision than those types of units. So using these in your army composition for vision can be very effective, especially since they don't cost very much. Now, another thing we're going to be looking at is the offensive uses of a pawn. Usually you'll want to try to get a handful of them if you're going to be using them offensively in an attacking manner. you're gonna often want to try to find a hole in the defenses. So say for instance that the enemy has a wall here with like turrets and stuff. You're not as pawns, you're not gonna want to try to push into this because you only have 300 health, 330 health. It's not gonna be enough to really survive and do a lot of damage if they've already set up defenses. So your best bet is actually going to be trying to work around the defenses and coming in a way that is less protected, if you can. Um, that's kind of the early game standard for pawns, is to try to find a hole and push through it. Another possibility would be to try to get past the enemy line before they have set up defenses. So maybe at the very beginning of the game, putting out maybe 3 or 4 pawns and trying to just sneak those back into their base back here maybe, and do damage before they even have any units up. And maybe they're building construction turrets or construction vehicles or bots, whatever it might be. You could come back here and do some damage. So that's something to keep in mind. We want to also be mindful that if you do choose to do an early aggression with pawns, that the amount of actions per minute you have to do in attacking can cause you to slow down at your base. You know, you're spending all that time fighting the enemy, you might not get out better units or remember to build different production or metal extractors maybe. So you have to be very careful on when you choose to do an attack with pawns early game, because it might not end up being worth it. Defensively, these guys are honestly good at doing a flank bonus to an attack. So say that you are being pushed heavily, okay? We're going to say right here, you're being pushed heavily down this area, and you just keep getting pushed back, pushed back, pushed back. A very efficient way of using pawns as a defense would be to get yourself to have bonus damage. Okay, and I'm going to show you through this example here. So you're being pushed, and you're running into issues where you just aren't making enough units to be able to defend against it. Oops, there we go. So these guys will be your front wall, and these guys will kind of be a surround bonus that you will give yourself. So when they push all the way forward and they are attacking actively, you can take these guys and, you know, try to push them back and take these pawns from the backside and try to push them into a bit of a choke, okay? Because these are faster, the pawns are pretty fast, so you can come in and kind of collapse on your enemy in a defensive aggression. That's really one of the best ways to use pawns early game for defense, because just them alone in a normal wall of units, they don't have enough HP to really do a lot. They can't really take hits. Now, when you're defending against maybe a heavy tank, we'll say, you can actually do decently one-on-one with a heavy tank, because plasma bullets take time to travel. So after you shoot a plasma bullet, it takes like a second before it even hits its target. Now, if you have a pawn and you are up against a heavy tank, all you have to do is change directions constantly, and the heavy tank will have trouble hitting you. And you can end up doing decently at defending against one heavy tank or 2 heavy tanks. But when you get into larger groups, these guys will be very bad at defense, okay? So something to keep in mind with them. Against turrets, these guys are generally pretty good against light laser turrets or the double laser and beamer turrets. They can really take them down. What would be recommended is to do a surround on the turret. That way you can double your damage. As soon as a unit is getting attacked from 2 sides, say it's getting attacked from that side and that side, it will take double the damage that it normally would. So using that effectively with your pawns is the best option you have to really do the maximum damage. When you're up against a bigger army as well, you can use pawns to take some of the hits by basically throwing them at the enemy. So we'll say, for example, we have a tank here, tank here, tank here. You know, there's like a bunch of tanks here. Okay, these pawns probably won't stand a chance alone against them. But what you can do is push your pawns into the enemy and be like right next to them. So every time one of these tanks shoots, it has to damage itself in order to hit you. That can be an effective use for pawns as well. Same goes for like any type of unit. You could even do the same concept with a tank or with light tanks, whatever tanks you have. You can use that same concept against stronger units to try to throw yourself into them so that they end up hitting themselves. But yeah, generally with pawns, you don't want to do very many aggressions against laser turrets, because one light laser turret versus one pawn, the light laser turret is going to win. It's a guarantee. The light laser turret 1 versus 1 is going to be much stronger. One good effective way of using pawns would be to quickly clear out a minefield. If for some reason the enemy put mines across this bridge, you could send maybe 4 pawns across first before sending your more expensive units to clear out the mines and use them as a sacrifice to clear the way for your more expensive units. That is definitely a valuable and valid option. Another thing you can do, we've already kind of talked about medium tanks and how anything that has a plasma shot 1v1, the pawn can be very effective against. But once you have, say, 6-7 tanks you're up against, the pawn, because of its low range, it becomes less effective. Because even if one tank misses this pawn here, even if a tank misses this guy, he could end up hitting these guys as they're running towards, you know? If they're all running and they shoot for this guy, but then hit this guy, it still is too much damage. So in bigger groups of both tanks and pawns are going to be severely weaker than the tanks. Missile tanks are another thing that you'll see, or I guess they're called missile trucks. You'll see those quite frequently, and those are actually pretty decent against pawn early game, especially because every single missile will target the pawn. So you can't use your mobility to your advantage as well with any type of projectile that targets and seeks the target. So an example of this would be missile tanks and the Janus or Riot tank. Those all, well, not the Riot tank, but the Janus has a heat-seeking missile that will follow the pawn no matter how it micros. So be very aware if there are a lot of targeted shots, your pawns will become much less effective against those type of units. Against a commander, these guys, you probably only need 7 against a commander if he does not degun, and you could easily kill him, because these do 90 damage per second, and you have, well, in this case we have 9 of them selected, but you are now doing a massive amount of damage. I think you're doing like 1,000 damage per second or something like that. But then also, if you are surrounding the commander, then you are doubling your damage also. So you've just doubled the amount of potential you have there. So do not underestimate pawns if you see them running at you. As a commander, be very sure to degun them, because they can kill you very rapidly. Overall, pawns are very weak against planes, very weak against tanks, and only okay against bots. They're one of the weakest units in the game and are very situational in order to be used effectively. So just keep that in mind. Make sure you are using them appropriately and don't waste your metal by spamming these guys when they're just going to die. You can also use them late game as well for like blocking shots, but it would be more effective just to use a tick, because the ticks cost a lot less metal and they move a little bit faster than the pawn and have a potential of getting through the back line just as well as a pawn does. So block your shots with ticks versus blocking them with pawns. Try to use your metal as efficiently as possible, and you'll have good luck with your games. So that's all for today, guys. I hope this was somewhat beneficial. Just some tips and tricks about using the pawn and grunt alike. These tips will obviously coincide with that unit as well. If you got any value out of this video or any videos from the past, be sure to give a subscribe. It really helps out. We are looking to produce a lot more content of this nature. Also, give a comment if you have any other tips you would like to add about the pawn or even bar in general, so that others can just be able to read and gain value from that as well. I appreciate you guys watching and just being able to spend time with us here today, and I'll see you on the next one.